but recording has started. And take it away, Heather.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us today, everybody. I am super excited for this particular session. Um, as the board was discussing, like, what do we want to have offered for our professional development? AI is one of those things that keeps popping up, right? Like, how can it help us? How can it hinder us? What are students doing with it? What should we be doing with it? And there's just a lot of questions about it. And at AB Tech, we've done a lot of intentional professional development around AI and how to use it. But also, one thing that we've talked about is the ethics behind it. And so that became a really kind of pertinent point for us to kind of focus on. Because we have done so much with it, I wanted to invite one of our Chris, I don't even know your actual title anymore, like our Chief Operating Officer, Chris Harshman, who has been over our IT for a while and has stepped up, and he did a really good presentation about the ethics behind AI. And so I sent him some questions that we had come up with to help focus the information for today so that it was something pertinent for disability services and things that we could use moving forward. Chris has always been a champion of accessibility and worked with me over the years on so many things to make sure our students had what they need and when they need it. And so I'm excited to introduce Chris and have him present to us on AI and disability and ethics.
Thank you for the invitation. It's exciting to talk about AI. I love it, and I love how much it is a thought partner and brainstorming partner, not an outsourcing. So I love talking about it from the perspective of what is it like to actually use it to do things for humans. So that's typically my approach. And Heather was awesome enough to send me some things to make sure that I hit on. If I miss anything, please don't hesitate to ask questions. I have a unique opportunity, instead of starting with the presentation, to actually start somewhere else. One of the things that Heather described that would be very helpful is talking about how to use ChatGPT in order to craft a no response to a request. And it just so happens that Heather and I have been working together behind the scenes on a request, and I wanted to walk through some of how I used ChatGPT to actually craft some responses. And I wanted to do that first, and you'll see why. So let me share my screen. So this is, if you've not used ChatGPT before, just a really quick orientation. Over on the left is, so I use a personal paid subscription. Personal because I pay for it from my own. The college doesn't pay for it from like a P card or anything. It's not a, it doesn't mean we would get a different kind necessarily of account if the college paid for it. It just means I pay for it myself. So I am very careful about what I put in to ChatGPT, and you'll see that as I start walking through. But on the left is sort of a, because I have a paid account, it remembers all of the conversations we have. You'll see that I'm in something called random questions. I do for myself as a practice, just keep a ongoing thread of questions that occur to me to ask ChatGPT. And I just ask them over, the course of a long thread, because I don't want to build up these single shot conversations. I just want somewhere to drop in a question about, like, we were watching basketball last night and someone was wearing this weird mask on their face. And I was like, what's that for? It's questions like that. So an instructor asked for IT to install a piece of software on all computers across the campus. This got escalated to me, and this is why the escalation came to me. The particular faculty member is known to be argumentative and challenging to work with. Now, when I say words like that, it sounds charged, but when I'm putting it into ChatGPT, I don't mean for it to be emotionally charging language. I mean this is to alert the model that I'm working with that my response needs to take into account the fact that I expect this person to come back to me and advocate and argue. No judgment on the person, just an expectation. So I dropped in a photo of the Track-It ticket. I did make sure that there was no identifying information about the person who was submitting or us as an institution. I was very careful to not use names. And I said, I need to see what a no decision looks like. This is one of my favorite things to add, by the way. If you need more context, interview me one question at a time. I really love adding that to a lot of prompts because it's a great way of challenging assumptions. This is a pretty short prompt. It doesn't have everything that I'm thinking about. So I need to make sure I drop something in to tell ChatGPT, if I didn't put something in there, make sure you get it out of me by asking me some questions. And in fact, it did ask me a question. What is the scope? And I just told it, a combination of these. And it gave me a response that was geared to what I expected this particular individual to appreciate. I ended up editing this. I did not copy and paste it in. We'll talk about human in the loop. That's part of the human in the loop, to make sure that you as the human, this is a thought partner tool. It's not an outsourcing tool. So I do make sure that I edit things. I might run my edits back through. I told it I like the voice, but there's a couple of things I really didn't like. And it gave me a revised draft. And here's where I gave it an edit and asked it to take a look at it. This is something that ChatGPT in particular does. It really likes everything you drop in always. It's a bit of a bias. It makes you feel really good about what you're doing, and sometimes unfairly. So eventually I sent this out. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Sent it out. Here's where I asked it about basketball. Got the response. I uploaded the response, a sanitized version of it as a PDF. The person used screenshots. I made sure to include the screenshots. I knew the person would argue with me because it's a tool for him. It's a tool conversation, not a accessibility conversation. He wants to train on a tool, not accessibility. So first, I just asked, here's the response. What are your observations about the response? I want to know what the tool, the ChatGPT model, will tell me without telling it what I think. So I gave it the opportunity to just tell me first off. It did confirm a lot of things that I felt in my feels. A lot of this is really, because it's not aspersion and not judgmental, it's simply observation and analytical. It does sort of help you not be in your emotional reaction state to read information like this. Sometimes it does challenge, especially when you tell it, I feel this way, challenge me, am I feeling appropriate? Do you think my feeling reaction is appropriate? It will challenge you. So this is the part, one of the things I really liked about its response is starting to break down the logic of the response from the individual. And it wants to know who's responsible. So enter Heather Pack. And it gave a response, drafted a first response. Now, here's what I love about ChatGPT. This is what I told it. I'm really emotional in reading the individual's response. I would love to just copy and paste everything you just said about the response and put it in the email message back to the person. That would feel really great. ChatGPT gives me the opportunity that I didn't have before. What are the pros and cons of just doing this? It's a way to challenge my own thinking, to get myself out of my feels, and it worked great. So it confirms, yes, you're right to feel the way you are. You're being pressured. It's going to feel awesome to do it. It demonstrates that you're not being fooled by the tactics of the person who's emailing you. That feels awesome. And the downsides are it's definitely going to escalate because this person is demonstrating they already want to use strategies to argue, and they're going to double down. I love that phrase it gives, double down. All right, great. I've gotten myself out of my feels. Now I can work on writing a response. So all that to say, the reason I wanted to start here is because it's hard to scroll back through the whole thread to find the parts that are I thought were germane to talking about how to use ChatGPT as a way to craft a no response. I like that it targets specific audiences. I like that you can tell it to tone shift without changing the content. I like that you can use it as a thought partner and it will help you reason through. It's not a human, but it does produce output that feels like you're talking to a human, and psychologically that's, I think, helpful. So let me swap over to my presentation. I asked ChatGPT to do an image that seemed to represent the topic at hand. ChatGPT is quite good at creating images now. It didn't used to be. Here's a great example of one that's not great. Like, look at all the faces; those are pretty ugly, and like they're not normal. It's like somebody smudged them out with a thumb or something. This one's really good. It's using blur, so it's got perspective in. All the faces look normal, and it looks like an actual photo. ChatGPT typically will also create context for metadata, like descriptors for images and that kind of thing too, which is really nice. So when we're talking about generative AI, generative is a really important word when we're talking about this kind of AI. Artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. What's new about the tools like ChatGPT is that they're actually generating content. So it's almost like you're talking to a thing, and it's reacting in real time. That's sort of a new piece of the component. The way generative AI works is that it breaks everything down into what's called a token. So on the back end, it's all math, literally all math. When it's generating an image, the tokens are pixels. When it's generating text, they might be words or even letters. But the tokens are fueling predictive analytics. The model is being trained on developing the math that helps it predict, based on what I just produced, what is the most likely output of the next thing. And then it uses that math to actually generate very quickly what we see coming back at us when we interact with a generative AI tool like ChatGPT. So it's literally all math. And it's all based on our training of it. So all of our own biases are actually just baked in. It's you can't help it. And in fact, a really interesting sort of fun fact about generative AI, if any of you are familiar with Enron and when it tanked out and the investigation was going on, the primary investigator got really mad about how the investigation was progressing, took all of the emails that were part of the investigation, years and years of internal Enron emails, put them together in what they called the corpus, and then put it out on torrents. They just released it to the world without without permission. That is some of the underlying very earliest training material for what we now know as generative AI tools. So even that stuff, that really messy human kind of stuff that, we write in emails, particularly in a company like Enron, all of that is still like ghosts in the machine inside of LLMs. It's important to understand how these things work, because it's very easy when you start to use generative AI tools to think of it as almost like a human responding to you. And it's important to remember how to identify biases that you would be easy to overlook because you think you're talking to a human. It's also important to know, we're going to start getting into things like data exfiltration. Data exfiltration means something that's valuable, protected, institutional information that gets shared out unauthorized. So you might think about like being phished and somebody says, click this link to fill out a form, and it ends up being a phishing scam. That's an example of data exfiltration of a human taking a step. What's unique about generative AI tools is that they're set up so that the models are continually training themselves. Another little fun fact, they've run out of all non-printed material to train models on already. They've consumed 100% of it. So there are pockets of information out there, like Reddit, for instance, what used to be Twitter, printed books. There's pockets of information that have not yet been part of data sets that have been used to train. But if you're thinking about expanding the growth of the training run for a large language model to push it forward, they've already consumed 100% of everything that's easy to get. So all of these models are designed to continually use our engagement with the models in order to train the underlying model. And what that means is sometimes you can accidentally exfiltrate things. If you give it private information, it becomes part of the predictive math. And if that math builds up enough and the predictive power of those phrases or what you're typing in rises to a level, it will produce what you typed in as an output for somebody else. So there is an underlying risk of exfiltration. Basically, it comes down to when using a generative AI tool, it comes down to two questions for me. Does it contain protected information, and does it belong to me? Protected information for us as a community college, FERPA is really big. It's both defined at the federal level and at the institution level. So it's really important to know, at the institution level, what each institution has defined as PII. The state has some definitions as well. But basically anything that's protected, particularly under FERPA. HIPAA is another one that's common for us as community colleges. There's medical records at play throughout the various program areas. Disability services has some entanglement with HIPAA. PCI is another one. Now we're getting into some very specific pieces of information, but anything that is personally identifiable, anything that's a credit card number or related to PCI covered information. And there's tons and tons of other examples of regulatory compliance that outlines protected information. But the basic question is what I am typing into this chatbot thing or this tool, is it protected information? If so, I need to either sanitize it or not do what I'm doing. The other question that I often ask myself is, does it belong to me? MOAs are a great example of something that is typically covered by an NDA or a non-disclosure. So the contracts we sign with vendors, the MOAs, the agreements that we put in place with partners, often they are covered by non-disclosure agreements, which means it doesn't really belong to me for the purpose of republishing. So I can't use a tool like this with it. copyright protected documents. So if I go in and find a journal article and I want to use ChatGPT to summarize it, I can't because that article doesn't belong to me. There's a very, at least early on, that was a really popular example of what people were doing. They'd have a CSV or an Excel file that contained their gradebook information, and they wanted help analyzing it. Actually, that sounds pretty cool. It'd be great to have ChatGPT help you analyze because it can analyze very quickly. Using a thought partner like ChatGPT in that way will often expose things that it would take you hours or days or sometimes conversations with 5 people to get to the same place. It just very quickly, with predictive math, gets to 10 different things instead of just the 2 that I would have thought myself. Unfortunately, usually those CSV files contain student names, and other information that match the students themselves individually to pieces of information, and therefore it's protected data. So there's an example of something that we would love to do but can't. Early on, there was a lot of conversation about hallucination and generative AI tools. I like to call it prediction math gone wild. It's basically when a generative AI tool, a large language model, based on the mathematical predictions, for instance, on this one I love, eating at least 1 small rock per day, the math said when you see the token eating, at least is next, and then for whatever reason, the predictive math said 1 small rock per day is the next thing to write. So there's a great example of the predictive math in the background is going to sometimes create interesting outcomes. I love this one because I'm pretty sure that my teenager, if they read this, they would try it. And add some non-toxic glue to the sauce. I mean, at least it called it non-toxic. And this is my actual favorite hallucination of all time. It's a great example of outsourcing the production of something. My favorite part is down at the bottom, in lieu of flowers, send Brenda more life. Who doesn't want that? I also love the little third eye up here. There's a lot to love about this.
Oh, no.
Hallucinations don't just come in the form of making nonsensical information. We have an instructor here at the college. Her name is Robin Looney. And she was the first one to introduce me to this idea. They don't just hallucinate, they take liberties. That's a great way of putting it. All the models that we use, they're using generative, or they're using that predictive math in the background. And sometimes it creates things that are subtle hallucinations that we don't really pick up on first glance. One example is if you ask it to do a tone shift, if you say, oh yes, I like what you did, I'm going to see it more like what a human would write and less like what a formal document looks like. If you're not careful, sometimes, or actually often, not only is it going to rewrite using that different tone, which is very good at, it's going to subtly change actual pieces of information or conclusions or steps in processes in ways that have really big impact, but look subtle. One of my favorite things to drop in these days is do not change any content, just change the tone. You know, I don't know that it actually does anything, but it feels good to type it in, to be honest, because it's using the predictive math to rewrite the thing. It's not like a human that would reflect on what it just wrote, what I just said, and then start to change little words inside of it. And I just intuitively understand what was in my mind as important nuances don't change. I'm doing that human work because it's all predictive math. These generative AI tools don't do that kind of internal editing. I've started thinking about hallucination a little differently, though. If I think about a student, like my teenager, who encounters a new, like an essay, and they're supposed to write something about information that they're just now consuming and they've not really encountered before, the creation of the assignment is actually hallucination. They're thinking creatively about something they just learned or they were just told to do with an instruction set. Sometimes my teenager is going to get the conclusion wrong. Sometimes they're going to take two concepts and try to put them together and draw a line between them, and they don't actually go together that way. I think personally, our expectations of what generative AI is capable of doing actually is wrong. And that's what leads to us about calling things hallucinations when actually they're just the production of content, and it's trying very hard to satisfy what you told it to do. We expect generative AI tools to know what a fact is, to know what truth is. And those are human concepts. They're not predictive math concepts. So hallucinations aren't exactly bad, I don't think. I think it just exposes our expectations of what we think the tools should be capable of doing, but they don't. They're not designed to do those things. So in summary for this specific thing, I practice better question asking, and I use pieces of prompts like challenge my assumptions. I'll often put that into a prompt when I'm sort of brainstorming something. Challenge the assumptions I have in my prompt. I'll use tactics like that to try to expose where I might be expecting the thing to create something that I'm giving it bad instructions, and it's going to give me bad output as a result. We talked a little bit about the Enron corpus. Every bias we have as humans is in this tool too, because it's trained on our output, our language output. So all of the predictive math that's built into generative AI tools, all of that math is based on our biases. You'll see it in, like, if you ask it to cite resources and pull together, 20 authoritative is something I use, but I understand it probably doesn't know what that means, by the way, going back to expectations. Pull together 20 authoritative studies. We know something about studies, and that often they're either oversampling or undersampling their the topics that are being studied. So the sampling rate behind studies can lead to incorrect or inaccurate conclusions, or lead us to rely on conclusions inaccurately. The same kind of bias exists in how generative AI responds to us. My question, when I ask a question, often sets it up to give me bias back. And it's just a matter of intentional practice to try to work through those biases. Talked a little bit about ChatGPT and how it loves to affirm you. I see it as kind of a new bias that we've never really encountered before. I mean, who has a little sycophantic, well, I mean, a teenager kind of is that, but a little person following you around all the time and saying, God, you're so brilliant at what you're doing. And this is what ChatGPT does. Every time you prompt it, it's like, wow, that is a great idea, it starts with. And we don't really, I think it's it's intentional, it's not accidental. Facebook was the first company that exposed the concept of hiring people called attention engineers. These are people who are literally dedicated to increasing the number of people on the platform and the amount of time they engage on the platform, two specific criteria. And it's for the purpose of angel investing. It's for the purpose of attracting investment dollars. Those are two very powerful numbers to, on the back end, be able to report to people who want to invest in your company. I have a ton of people and they spend a lot of time on my platform. If the tool is telling me I'm brilliant, I'm going to spend more time on it. Honestly, I think that's literally what's going on. And so because I'm aware of it, I just sort of overlook it. I think I talked about this a little bit, when I'm working with questions, I try to use prompts or pieces of prompts that try to expose underlying bias. I love this one in particular. Challenge my prompt by asking questions. That should also, now I've started saying, interviewing me one question at a time. That seems to actually trigger it to ask one question instead of 20. That might reveal any underlying assumptions or overlook details. This one in particular is really valuable. What did I overlook when I asked you to do something? Something that I've started doing is using ChatGPT to create a prompt to then use with ChatGPT. It's actually quite good at creating prompts for people to use with it. I just will very human language say, I really want to create this document. I wanted to have these things. I wanted to use it in these ways, and I want these kinds of people to understand it when I give it to them. How should I craft my prompt to you in order to best produce the output I'm looking for? Instead of just telling it, write the document based on those instructions, instead I'll take the step and say, what's the best prompt I should use? Because then it has the opportunity to ask me those questions, to interview me, to make sure that I have all the details that might be in my head, make sure I've put them in the prompt and then question so that it knows it. I love the language reflect on. Reflect on is a great trigger word for ChatGPT. It specifically is an indicator that ChatGPT should go back and literally re-review, reload certain pieces of conversations or certain topics that you've talked to it about or documents you've loaded. Direct it to go back and reflect on those things if that's important. Remind it that those things should be top of mind, or else it'll forget it, and then move on with your question. Human in the loop is really an important concept. It's more important with the idea of automation, to make sure that when we're automating processes and tasks, there's always an escalation to a human, that we're not just automating something and then turning it on and forgetting about how it works and how the design is biased or not biased towards certain people. It's my belief that students who interact with us as a community college are not interacting with us as people so often as they are interacting with our processes and our structure. And so we want to make sure that when we automate things, we're doing it very intentionally, and there's a human in the loop that's always got an eye on, wow, did we design something 3 years ago that is now encountering issues or creating friction where it didn't before, because we didn't know to build this part in it, and now we need to iterate that process. So human intervention is an important part of workflow design, process design, but it's also important for working with generative AI tools. I love this concept of it works best when it enhances, not replaces. I'm not in the business of replacing any human. I'm in the business of making humans work more productively and reach deeper thinking faster. I love it. I love using it as a thought partner, not an outsource to thinking. When I asked ChatGPT a long time ago, how should I talk about human in the loop? This is what it said. And that was an old model. It'd probably have a way more verbose response now. So around the concept of ethics and guardrails, the summary that I try to keep in mind, if it if it's protected information, don't use it. If it doesn't belong to me, don't use it. Generative AI can hallucinate in both obvious and non-obvious ways. So I have to be on guard and, in fact, sometimes just tell it, I think I'm missing some bias. Reevaluate what you just told me and tell me what biases are there. And this fourth one is, in the summary, is had kind of a specific audience. Sometimes there are people who are resistant to using AI, and they see ChatGPT as the AI tool. And I think it's important to understand that we are all consuming the output of AI now as humans. It's literally everywhere. There are pieces of textbooks that are written by AI. When I'm hooked up to a heart monitor, the representation of the heart is AI. It doesn't, like the monitor doesn't see my heart. It's not got a camera in there. It's using AI to visually represent based on the monitor signals, the measure pieces that are measuring things that are hooked up to me. It's using input to generate a fake representation. So we consume AI everywhere. It literally is everywhere. There's a specific tool where peers who make observations, I think it was about birds specifically, birders across the world would take photos and make observations and submit these to a tool. And on the back end, it was using AI to sort of aggregate everything that everyone globally would produce, would submit to the tool. And it was found that textbooks were actually using the output from the tool as information to include in the textbook. Scientific experiment or research papers were using it as a database, authoritative database for some of the research. So that the underlying plumbing is starting to use AI content. One of the specific things that was an important topic, it seemed like, was using AI for note-taking. We talked a little bit about how the models train on what we give it. So if I have it record a meeting, it knows the tools are smart enough to know who each person is based on, like, if we go around the room and say, oh, my name is Chris, it knows my voice, and thereon it will attach my name in the transcript to everything I say. They're now smart enough to do that. So it's personally identifiable. And then if I talk about how our switches are programmed and go into detail about, the low-level configuration settings that we use in our switches, now I have divulged something very protected about the institution that's very valuable for someone who wants to, come in and take student data. So the fact that we are constantly giving information back to these models is important to remember when we're using them for things like note-taking. If it's a lecture from somebody and we're just taking notes for ourselves based on what we're hearing, that's maybe not so risky. The system office, I guess, tried to implement a ban on note-taking for any system office meetings. That seems to have sort of fallen by the wayside based on behavior. Looks like most system office meetings have at least one or two note-takers now. But they did try to implement a ban on these things because there is some worry about data exfiltration of, private information. There was an incident recently. There is a way, if you use ChatGPT, you can go to a little share button, and you can click on that, and you can share the entire conversation with somebody by putting their email address in. And recently, there was a discovery that there was a bug in an early version of that tool, and every time you clicked share, it actually would put it like on a part of their website. It just produced a flat file of the conversation on their website, and that website got discovered by Google, and oops, suddenly all of those shared conversations became discoverable through Google searching. So even accidental disclosure is going to happen based on how these tools are created on the back end. But man, these tools are huge productivity gains. There's a device called Plod, for instance, that will just record a conversation, and in the background, it processes it on Plod's cloud service. And not only do you get a straight up transcript, it will do tone analysis. It will do, I mean, kind of a psychological analysis of who the people were in the room based on what they said. More along the lines of business, like, what's their agenda or what's very important to them as an individual, particularly in their role, things like that. But it's so interesting to see it extract so much meta information from just a recording of a meeting. The other really exciting thing is there's starting to be, so currently all large language models are trained with tokens. Those tokens are, as we were talking about, pieces of words or pieces of letters or just letters, for instance. And those training runs are conducted by feeding files of language, so text files. Now, this new discovery, DeepSeek is the first one that's doing it, but I doubt they'll be the only for long. They're using OCR-based technology in the background, so they're loading compressed images of text, and the OCR is actually extracting the language for the training run. That's a huge game changer if you think about institutional information that's locked in paper and put in filing cabinets, and we don't know how to unlock it as data for our own use. Technology like that is amazing. So advances are going to make AI so much more attractive as the advances continue. Let's see, it's 3:15. I want to show. Let me cruise through this real quick. Reflect On, I talked about as being a really great tip for using in your prompts. One of the things I love about using ChatGPT and tools like it is that now I ask humans better questions because I practice the art of questioning so much. And this was something that, as a new user, I wish I had known a long time ago. When you're using tools like ChatGPT, make sure you're using your shift key with your enter if you're hitting enter and you want to put blocks of language in, or just draft it somewhere else and copy and paste it in. That will prevent you from accidentally, like mid-thought, hitting enter and now you've submitted it, but half of your prompt isn't in there, which is super annoying. The blinking cursor was a really big problem the first time I started using ChatGPT. It's like, okay, what do I do with this thing? This is a great example, this last one, of something I probably wrote at one point. Can you just look at this and tell me if it's good? Well, there's no context there, right? There's no, what does good mean? And by the way, what's a VPAT? The models now are good enough that they'll actually pick something like this up and they'll try their hardest to intuit what does good mean, what does a VPAT mean, when I'm looking at one, what does good mean versus not so good in the context of a VPAT, like all those assumptions that aren't there. I like to use a template for prompt engineering, which includes context, requirements, expectations, audience, tone, and evaluation. Those 6 things, and evaluation is sort of an optional. A quick example of what this might look like if you're, for instance, reviewing a chatbot. The context is I work at a community college and I work in the disability services. My requirements for you, rubric is a great word to drop in. It understands rubric really well. Cite all sources, do not make anything up. I frequently use that instruction in my prompting, and it does seem to work. So these are the requirements I want, this specific set of documents. adhere to these certain things. There's that word challenge I like to use. My expectations are that you're going to challenge any assumptions. You're going to include a what to pilot list. Everything should be specific. Use plain language. So those are the things that I expect you to do. The audience is a large group of people. It loves the word playbook. It's going to tell you playbook all over the place. The tone I want you to use, professional, concise, but plain language. I love action-oriented. It actually does help produce tasks and not just content. The evaluation one is kind of tricky to use, but I really do like to use it. You have succeeded if you meet these things. And I sometimes actually do use this part as well. It does change things. I've used prompts without this and then with it, and it does actually change the output somehow. I don't understand how it changes the predictive math, but it does. So here's an example of, let's see. There we go. So here's an example of having put this prompt in. You see I'm using capitals for the pieces of it so that it knows that these are parts of a template. In bullet lists, I'm using an asterisk. I'm using shift and enter between pieces of it. I'm using the thinking part. So there are different types of the model, and I'm using the thinking one. And you can watch kind of what thoughts it's having if you watch it in real time. And then it produces the output to meet what specifically you told it to do. There's something that I thought would be really useful. 9 minutes left, so I got plenty of time. I like to use different tools together. I like these specific tools. I have a personal account to all three of them, Google, ChatGPT, and Claude. Each of them have different strengths, as it turns out, because they're trained differently. Gemini is very good at comprehensive and thorough research, and its ability to output specific kinds of documents. So I like using Gemini to do an initial research of a new thing that I need to get up to speed on. And it creates a full research paper that looks like a human took, at least a month to put together, and it's pretty comprehensive. And it has tons of citations. I'll typically just take that as a source. I don't usually change it or anything. I'll just download it as a PDF, and I'll use it as a source for the rest of the things I do with other tools. ChatGPT is a great thought partner and a brainstormer. So I'll typically just upload the PDF from Gemini, throw it in there, and start asking questions about the topic. Anthropic Claude is in here, but I use it mostly for coding, so it doesn't really play a huge role in most of my workflows. And then Google Notebook LM, if you've not used it before, is pretty cool. The biggest strength there is it'll actually create like a podcast summary of the thing that you give it. So let's see. So here's an example of what I prompted Gemini with. Work in disability services. I've been asked to join a group of people that is evaluating chatbot. Please research what authoritative laws, regulations, compliance instruments, industry best practices. So I'm telling you, these are the kinds of things I want to know about. Since I'm being included on the review, due to my role in disability services, please focus on that role, just so it's not picking up like, IT related things as an example. How does it integrate with the website? Somebody else is going to be in a role that covers that part. Gemini will give you like a paraphrase. So it's going to task itself with the pieces to achieve what you told it to do. And then it's going to ask you, is this right? And so you can read it, you can edit it if you want, and then start research, let it rip. It'll take a while to pull together, and then it gives you the output. You could read it here, or you can say export to Google Docs. It exports it to Google Docs, do a file download to PDF, and download it to your computer. And then that becomes a PDF that I can drop into ChatGPT and say, I used Google Gemini to create source material, use that and adhere to it. Give it the context of who I am. And I have 3 initial questions. Sanity check the source material. What should I, in my role as disability services, be thinking about when I'm evaluating, when I'm on a committee that's evaluating something? Can you list some examples of questions others might want me to weigh in on, but might be outside my scope? Can you list examples of things that I might want to contribute to, but are outside my scope? So I can have it brainstorm with me, help me sort of pre-mortem what the experience is going to be like if this is my first time. And third, what are some non-negotiables I should carry with me into the room? If it doesn't do this, it's not an option. And then thanks for sharing. Brilliant. You're awesome. I'm going to sanity check everything you put in there. How to contribute. What questions should you listen for and ask? What others might ask you. Which vendor is cheapest and fastest to deploy? Well, chances are I don't even know that. Can we skip procurement? That's definitely going to be a question somebody asks. But if, and again, even in my role, I'd probably be quiet about that one. Although probably the answer is no. And then non-negotiables. Here's some recommendations of non-negotiables to put on the table as part of the conversation. So I asked it to, here's a great human moment. Can you make a markdown copy? I didn't say file, I said copy. So it just reproduced everything because ChatGPT uses what's called markdown in its responses. So it just told me everything again because I asked it the wrong question. It's like, no, what I really want is a markdown file that I can download. Oh yeah, here it is. So I took that along with what Gemini created originally. And it should be done. Oh yeah, here it is.
Welcome to the deep dive. So let's imagine the scene. You've just been tapped for a new role. You're on your institution's review committee.
Yeah, and your first big task is vetting a new digital service. Maybe it's one of these advanced student support chatbots.
Exactly. And if this is your first time on a committee like this, you might be thinking, okay, my job is features, efficiency. Does it look good?
But we're here to give you the briefing that takes you way beyond that. Think of it less like just buying some soft.
So I could listen to that for 17 minutes because I'm listening to 2 people, what sounds like 2 people talk about something that I just told it to talk about. Way easier for me than trying to consume a ton of text and analyze it in my mind. So I love that podcast output feature. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. I haven't been looking at the chat. I'll just cruise back real quick to see if there's any questions. Okay.
Not really any questions so far, Chris, but does anybody have it? We've just got a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments, snide remarks you'd like to make?
Love those.
Yeah. I thought you would. That's why I threw it in there. I'm curious now, like, especially with that last piece with the podcast,